Now that we got through some administrative stuff, we're going to immediately dive into our first technical topic. In this section, we're going to start to look at some of the internals of Node.js. Once we have a better idea of how Node works internally, we'll then be able to leverage that knowledge to write some more performant code inside of our applications. So let's get started right now. We're going to start off by taking a look at a very simple diagram. And then over time, we're going to come back to this diagram right here and add on a lot more detail to it to show you how Node is internally structured. So here's our first iteration. At the very top, we've got a box that represents the JavaScript code that you and I write. So this is the actual code that we place into JavaScript files and then eventually execute at the command line. When we run node and then index.js at the command line, we are invoking the Node.js project. Now, just like any other JavaScript project out there, Node.js internally has a collection of dependencies that it uses to actually execute your code. Two of the most important dependencies, and these are two dependencies that we're going to focus on quite a bit throughout this course, are the V8 project and the libuv project. The V8 project is an open source JavaScript engine created by Google. The purpose of this project is to be able to execute JavaScript code outside of the browser. And that's what we do when we run our JavaScript code from the terminal. The libuv project over here is a C++ open source project that gives Node access to the operating system's underlying file system. It gives us access to networking, and it also handles some aspects of concurrency as well. So anytime that you show this diagram to someone, their first question might be, okay, so we got one module right here that gives us access to the file system and networking and other stuff. And then we've got this one right here that actually executes our JavaScript code. So what is the purpose of Node.js? And that's a very good question. So I want to give you an idea of why we use Node at all and why we don't directly use V8 or libuv. The first thing to understand is that internally, some of these other libraries are not JavaScript code at all. The V8 project is like 70% C++ code, and libuv over here is 100% C++. So chances are that you, as a JavaScript developer, you probably don't want to be writing C++ code all day. You want to write JavaScript code and just have it work. So that's one of the purposes of Node.js. Node gives us a nice interface to use to relate our JavaScript side of our application to the actual C++ that's running on our computer to actually interpret and execute our JavaScript code. The other thing that Node does is provide a series of wrappers and a very unified and consistent API for us to use inside of our projects. So for example, Node implements the HTTP module and FS, Path, Crypto. All these modules right here have very consistent APIs, and they all ultimately refer to a functionality that is mostly implemented inside of the libuv project over here. So again, you probably don't want to get access to direct C++ code. You want to require in some JavaScript function and use a JavaScript function inside of your code base. So by making use of Node, you don't have to work with all the C++ that exists inside of libuv itself. Okay, now we've got a better idea of why we use Node at all. Let's take a quick pause right here, and we're going to continue the next section and continue fleshing out this diagram.